Today, I came to share with you a very dark chapter of my life. When I was a child, I had a very good relationship with my mother and my grandmother. The three of us were very close. We loved each other very much, received a lot of affection, a lot of attention. I had a very peaceful relationship when I was about 13 years old. My grandmother, who was the person I loved most on the face of the earth, whom I took care of, who took care of me, who was priceless to me. She had cancer and she died. It was very painful. It was very hard. My mother didn't have any sisters. My grandmother had a sister who lived in another state. She couldn't come to the wake. You know, those wakes like in the movies where there's only the coffin. Even so, since my grandmother was part of the church, some people, let's say those were the people in her life, but there weren't many of them. It was a small neighborhood church, and the pastor especially wanted to hold her wake, you know? It was very traumatic for me. I cried a lot. I suffered a lot. It was a very, very difficult time in my life. After that, my mom became completely different. My mom started drinking alcohol. She started going out with guys like totally out of character. She started to become extremely aggressive, and I wasn't used to that aggression. Let's be honest, our relationship was really good. Once my grandmother left, I realized the relationship might not have been good. Because of the balance my grandmother demanded, in other words, my grandmother insisted that we treat each other that way, and not really because my mom sometimes wanted that. Another thing I realized is that my grandmother was really the one who was my mother, not my mom. And since we all lived in the same house, I didn't notice that. But when it came to bathing, bedtime, food, clean clothes, even the house chores, it was my grandmother who did everything, not my mom. Since my mom was always there, I assumed she was acting as a mother. Well, for a long time, I never knew who my father was. My mom always spoke very badly about him. So I had a lot of anger, a really deep anger inside me. I didn't understand why. Everything was very painful. And that's when my mom developed a respiratory problem, those respiratory problems. I was already about 16 or 17 years old. It took us a year to go to the hospital every week, out of nowhere. She had episodes. She would stop breathing. I had to help her breathe. She had to stay at home using breathing equipment, you know. We received donations from some people at the church my grandmother attended, because since I didn't work, my grandmother was retired. My mother, she didn't have a job. She didn't have a resume. We started to go through a lot of hardship. We started to go hungry. We started living in very poor conditions and surviving on food baskets donated by the church. My mother couldn't afford to buy the medication, so we also received donations, sometimes from pharmacies, from places where we asked for help, you know. And it was a really tough situation, and I was there, 17 years old, finishing high school. I liked studying. I liked reading. I've always enjoyed consuming new content, interesting content. But when you're hungry, you can't read. When your stomach is empty, you can't focus, you know? That started to get in the way. In my third year of high school, my grades were really bad. And the teachers, they were supportive, you know? They saw that I was hardworking and they tried to help me. They also tried to give me food baskets to take home to my mom. But once someone helps you, they're not obligated to help you every month, right? And we need it every month. So the people who liked me, they helped me, but just now and then, I didn't have the courage to keep asking either, you know? I was quieter, more withdrawn. And because of all the fights with my mom and my grandmother's death and my mom's illness, all of that became really heavy for me. And that's when my mom, she also passed away. She also died. And at 17 years old, I was about to turn 18. About 6 months later, a social worker came, someone I could stay with, my aunt. She was from another state, and I didn't want to go there at all. Like, I really didn't want to. So I would have to stay in a kind of shelter, like a foster home, until I turned 18. And then after I turned 18, they would try to send me to a women's shelter, which is like there are refugees, there are immigrants, right? It's a government-run shelter. But they would try to get my benefits approved, to have some kind of support. What I really needed was to find a job. Things were going from bad to worse. And it was in one of those situations that I met a guy At the school entrance, there was always a crowd there. There was like a hot dog and pastry stand at the school entrance because this school was really big. It was also a college. So it was in one of those moments that I was sitting there, not because I was asking for anything since I didn't have money for that, but because my school year was ending. And like I wasn't going to be able to keep studying because I couldn't afford to buy books. I was really, really down. Sitting there, we started talking. He said I was very pretty, asked where I lived. I was really embarrassed because I didn't have the courage. So I explained a little to him. He got really interested in my story and he started talking to me, right? He said he wanted to take me to where I was. And I told him I was really embarrassed. And I told him everything I went through, my current situation, what I was going through, what was happening to me. And then he felt, I don't know, touched and invited me to go to his house. I went, and when I got to his house, he treated me really well. He lived alone. He was in his first year of college. His parents were really well off. They lived in a house in the same city, but in a different neighborhood. And they had rented like a little apartment for him, one of those 4-story ones, you know, but it was all furnished, all nice, so he could stay close to college and not have to spend money on transportation. Now look at the privilege, right? The person has a father and a mother who pay for an apartment for them near college. So she doesn't have to spend her time on public transportation or driving. It's a huge privilege. And he was so touched by my story that he asked me to be his girlfriend. We started dating and he said I could live with him. Of course, I loved the offer and the idea. I told him that I was surprised by that maybe we should wait until I turned 18. I talked to social services and social services talked to him for him. Like he was a little older than me, right? I was about to turn 18. He was 19, about to turn 20. So he was young too. They said, okay, that's fine. We can do it after you turn 18, right? And from now until then, are you going to keep coming here and all that? I said, I don't want to come back. Someone who has a house to live in won't want to stay in a shelter where you have to keep hiding your things and living in those conditions, honestly. So I asked them if I could sign the responsibility agreement and all that. Anyway, I started dating him. I confess that I maybe had a very troubled mind. I didn't have the focus to do things. So while he was studying, I was still trying. First, the anxiety of turning 18 so I could be able to do things on my own. Everything I wanted to do, I needed my mom. The death certificate of my mom still hadn't been given to me. Honestly, at that age, I didn't even know where to get that document. No one was guiding me, right? So I couldn't have the autonomy to work on my own projects, my own documents, to do the things I wanted, to get a job, to get my work papers, to do things because I still wasn't 18 yet. When I turned 18, I finally got my work papers. I looked for a job and I couldn't get a job anywhere. And then came my first pregnancy. My boyfriend, he worked at his father's company. So he had a comfortable situation with his father there regarding his schedule coming and going, and he didn't have that worry about being fired. I had my first daughter, and then there went my dreams, my plans to go to college or to work and have my own money. I became a housewife, taking care of the child. Our first daughter was a blessing in our lives. She had her own little room because he lived in a 2-bedroom house, so her little room was available there. It used to be his study room. We got rid of the study room, right? So he supported me, supported my daughter, covered the household expenses, and I tried to do everything at home, right? Food, laundry, everything I could do. When my daughter turned 1.5 years, I was starting to think like, now she's going to daycare, I'll be able to work, I'll be able to have a life of my own. I went there and got pregnant with my second daughter. It was really tough for me at the time because I didn't want it at all. I really wanted to have surgery. At the time, I couldn't get my tubes tied, you know? I didn't have permission to get my tubes tied. And his dream was coming true. His dream was always to have a family, to have daughters, right? But all of that for me started to feel more and more suffocating. And when I realized it, I had already been in this for 8 years. My oldest daughter was 8 years old. My youngest daughter was already 6, right? 6.5, almost 7. And my life was all about being a housewife. I looked at myself in the mirror and thought I looked horrible. I thought I was ugly. I thought I was worn out, right? I wanted to have a life, go to the gym and do things, but I just didn't have the energy. I didn't have focus. I didn't have discipline. I felt like I was getting old, that the time to go to college had passed, that I couldn't fulfill and achieve my dreams. So all of that kept bringing me down more and more. And my husband, he was a good man. But without realizing it, or maybe, I don't know, I started getting annoyed with everything he did. If he came home from work and walked in with dirty feet without removing his shoes, I'd yell and curse at him. If he left his plate in the sink, I'd argue with him. I began calling him lazy, saying he did nothing and I was the housemaid. I think I didn't want to accept the role of maid, that this was my role in life, that I was a wife, a mother, and a maid of my husband and my daughters. That ate away at me because I always wanted to be an educated, hardworking woman with my own money. Ever since my mother was sick, I had to keep asking others for things, I really wanted to go after things, get a job, have money. I even tried to get a job at the church since I didn't need a work permit, but the pastor said there was nothing for someone my age, right? That I would have had to grow up in the church to be able to serve in some kind of ministry there. With my mom in the condition she was in, I couldn't work. And then after that, she passed away, right? I went to a shelter, still getting a lot of help. I started a relationship a few months later. I had my first child, then I had my second child. Everything happened so close together. So I didn't have the freedom to know who I was, what I liked, what I was into. I was always nervous. I was always stressed. I was tired. And then it happened. When I went to talk to him, we had a really bad fight because he said that, whether he wanted to or not, my arguments, sometimes he wasn't useful at home. He didn't have a role, as a man in the house. It was something he lost over time when we were together because he had been living alone for a year. His house was tidy and organized. But after I got involved in his life, had daughters, and took care of everything at home, he started losing basic habits sometimes, like being careful with pee in the toilet, taking out the trash, rinsing a glass, He lost all of that, so his focus was always work, 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 work. He didn't have time for me and the kids, and he always threw it in my face. He had to work to pay the bills, support our 2 daughters since I didn't work, and handle everything. It was a lot of pressure. And today I understand him, but at the time I didn't, because it was pressure, because he didn't share it with me. I could also handle the pressure from work if we had someone to take care of the kids and I could work. And then in one of those fights, we had a really bad argument and I decided I was going to leave the house. And he started saying, "You're going to leave the house, and where are you going to go? Where are you going to live? Who are you going to live with?" And I told him, I've already lived in a shelter. If I need to, I'll live in a shelter again. And he said, "You're not going to take the girls, And in one of those moments, thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, I ended up reconnecting with a friend from my teenage years, from school, from when my grandmother was still alive. And then we started talking online. She told me she was living in a shared apartment nearby, and she said I could come over one day to have coffee with her. I talked to my husband and told him, "Look, the girls are going to school. Am I going to stay home alone?" And then I had my job was taking care of the house, right? I cleaned the house, ironed clothes, cooked, and prepared lunch. He would come, eat, and everything was organized. The girls, they were at a school where they got out at 4 in the afternoon, so I said I was going to meet up with a friend from school from my teenage years. He even thought it was strange because I didn't have many friends, but I went to meet her. When I got to her house, we started talking and she offered me some juice. But since her house was really nice, we put on some music, we laughed, we talked, we started reminiscing about things from our teenage years, things from school, boys we were interested in. She offered me a glass of gin and then I started drinking with her. And I had never even drunk before, Because since I had daughters, right, I had a lot of responsibility. I started drinking and I kept drinking. And then when I realized it, I was doing this every day. I would leave lunch, go to this friend's house, and I started lying to my husband, saying I was helping her with her work. He'd ask, "What does she do for work?" And I'd always say, "She works in catering and stuff like that, so don't worry, I help her with things over there and all." "But will she actually pay you?" "I'm just doing a trial. If it works out, she'll pay me." But that was all just talk. She worked at a place nearby which had regular business hours. But in the afternoon, she was kind of changing her job and she managed to get some free time. So I would go to her place and we would, get high, and she introduced me to drugs, and I started using them. I felt so good and so light trying that, and then I just started to relax, And the first time I realized it, I lost track of time. And then my husband had to pick up the kids, go home, and sometimes return to his father's company. Because the time the girls got out, which was 4 p.m, was right in the middle of his work. But since he was the one with the car and it wasn't that close, he would pick them up, drop them off at home, and go back to work. And I wasn't home. He was trying to find his house and the girls' house. He recalled me mentioning it, but couldn't remember where. When I got home around 6 p.m., he was very angry with me. Because I got home totally high, really high, and not from alcohol, I had used some stuff she had introduced me to. And then when I stopped to realize it, we had another fight that day. I wasn't eating well, I was getting high, I wasn't drinking water, I would stay up all night. I brought the first drink and the first pack of cigarettes into the house and started smoking indoors. He started to call me out and argue. He said I smelled bad, so our fights now were because of the smell inside the house since we had 2 daughters. Because I wasn't being a good example, because my hair smelled bad, because he didn't enjoy being by my side anymore, because he never thought he'd be married to a woman who smoked and smelled bad. He didn't know that I was already using other things at my friend's house, so we fought a lot and then we started arguing a lot. He stuck to his usual routine and expected me to do the same, but I didn't want that. Looking back, I realized I didn't want the same routine. Maybe if I'd considered a different one, it had worked, but it worked the way it was, and it worked for him, not for me. For me, I was dissatisfied. We had a really bad fight, and I told him I was going to leave home again, and this time I had somewhere to stay, my friend's house. And he said, so go, let's see how long you'll last there. And I said, fine. Then he said, aren't you taking my daughters? And that's when I left my daughters with their father. I left them with him. They didn't really understand why I was leaving home, but I didn't leave in front of them. I waited for them to go to school so I could move out. My friend welcomed me there, but my friend also asked, so, okay, you can stay at my place, girl, that's fine, but what about work? Like it or not, I had to work. I couldn't just live in someone else's house for free, but I wasn't even thinking about that detail. I just wanted to relax. That's all I wanted. I admit that the first few weeks at her place were enough for us. For us not to work out, because she would go grocery shopping, but her food was hers, There was no sharing food, so at first she would share, but then she stopped. Girl, look, you have to help out with the groceries because I can't keep sharing, Maybe talk to the girl's dad, but girl, legally speaking, I was the one who had to pay child support to him, So there was no way I could ask him for anything. I messaged him for help. He sent me money so I wouldn't go hungry. I shopped for her house, but only once. And also the drugs, I started using them. And she, didn't want to share anymore either because she said, hey, girl, it's one thing for you to come here. We use a little here, a little there. But now, girl, living here daily just wasn't possible. That was when my daughter's father was helping me get food and I began buying drugs. So I started trading one thing for another and I started numbing myself. I started losing weight. In just a month, I had already lost about 3 kilos. And since I was always thin, I became very skinny. 3 kilos was enough. For people to look and see that I was starting to go downhill, because I was already thin and time kept passing. And when I really realized it, my friend and I had a huge fight because we were numb, we were high. It was around 11 at night. There were 2 guys there. I didn't want to be with them, but she started fighting with me because I had to be with this guy because her boyfriend was the one who supplied the drugs. And then, this friend of her boyfriend, he was well off. And it was better for me to be with this guy because he could help me financially. But deep down, this guy lived alone. She was alone. She kind of wanted to push me onto him. To this guy for me to, go live with him, to be together. And I didn't go along with it. And I remember her mentioning it in passing. And she started arguing with me, saying that I really should be with the guy. That I was stupid, that my marriage was over, that I was failing in life, that I wasn't raising my daughters, that I didn't help her at home. And this argument was a wake-up call for me. Because at that moment, when she started saying that I was failing in life, that I had left my 2 daughters with their father, and that I had to be with this guy, and deep down she started saying that the guy lived alone and that it would be good and all that, I started to realize that it was because she wanted to get rid of me there. And that's when reality hit me, That's when reality hit me. I even kissed this guy, and honestly, I don't even remember because I was so high that I don't even remember. Like, I just remember that the next day I woke up, like, I stopped, I lit a cigarette on the balcony, you know? Like, I remember sitting there lighting a cigarette on her balcony and I started smoking, looking out at the sky and thinking to myself, what am I doing? What am I doing? Like, I didn't want the routine I had with the husband I had, but I'm accepting being humiliated by someone in their house, being supported by another person who had every right in the world to destroy me and was destroying me because I wasn't doing anything to help her. The most I did there was organize things. But since I was used to being the maid, I was turning her into my maid. That's the truth. And that was irritating her. Why? Because sometimes she would come home from her job and she would get home around 2 p.m, more or less. I hadn't cooked and she'd come home irritated, needing to wash dishes, pick up clothes, clean up messes, and empty the ashtray. She would come talk to me sometimes while I was on the phone. I would spend hours watching other people's stories, watching reels on Instagram, and I didn't care about anything, you know, like I was just there living my life. She got annoyed but didn't have the courage to say anything. It was like, get your life together or something. But when she was intoxicated, she would get aggressive, and just like she got aggressive the day before, trying to push me towards some guy, cursing at me, saying I was stupid, like, she had never behaved that way before. In a way, it was different from how she usually is. So when she got home from work, I tried to do the basics. So I washed the dishes, started cooking, got things organized, put some laundry in the machine, and started thinking to myself, man, I'm doing laundry for myself and another woman. I'm making food for myself and another woman. I'm washing the dishes that another friend and I dirtied, man. It's almost like a marriage, except we're just friends, you know? Now, at least there, I had my daughters close to me, and honestly, every time I missed them, I would numb myself, you know? I would smoke a cigarette, start to like put like a little piece of paper in my mouth, a candy, like something just to get out of myself. And I didn't even realize that sometimes it was because I missed my routine, my home, my life, you know? I started thinking, what am I doing? When she got home from work, we talked. I told her, you were nervous yesterday, right? But she said she didn't remember. Then I said, you can tell me the truth. Let's be honest and talk openly. Tell me how you feel. I want to listen. We ended up having a really deep girl talk. And she went and said, look, girl, yes, I love you so much, but I think that after you came to live here, things just fell apart and all that. We used to have fun, but now, you know, we're really crossing the line. What I did yesterday was wrong. I'm sorry. And so on, blah, blah, whatever. So I told her that I had decided I was going to go back home, and she kind of gave a slight, genuine smile, like on the inside, but on the outside, she said, no, it's okay. It's up to you. If you want to stay, my house is here, but if you want to leave too, that's fine. Like, I think she was happy. I was getting tired of her, and I contacted my ex-husband to talk. Honestly, he was really upset with me. He was really mad at me, but he said I could go there so we could talk, and he did. He left work early so the girls wouldn't get home yet, because they didn't want the girls to see me there yet. And then I asked him for forgiveness. I explained everything to him. I told him everything I had done, everything that had happened. You know, he hugged me. He told me that I never went to therapy, that maybe he also failed by not supporting me. When I looked for therapy, when I wanted to seek therapy, he said it was nonsense. And with my story, where I came from, of course it wasn't nonsense. He realized that. He said he also felt bad and guilty because he sometimes didn't listen to me. Much of my routine at my friend's house, discussing our relationship, was something I wanted to bring into my marriage. So I say that even though I'm not proud of that phase of staying at my friend's house like a teenager, maybe that was my adolescence in a way. Asking to live a little, and I acted that way, leaving the situation, leaving my child. At least the good part of it is that I brought into my marriage the kind of communication I had with my friend. To say what we think, to say what we feel. My husband and I had a really honest talk like that, something we had never done before, not once in 8 years of marriage. And he said a lot of things he was thinking. I said a lot of things I was thinking. He told me about problems at work that he had never shared with me before. And he said that telling me those things felt like a sign of weakness to him. And I told him that this explains the pressure and, you know, his emotional exhaustion, and our marriage changed completely, like night and day. So I'm not proud that we went through this. It wasn't good that it happened. I wouldn't advise other women to leave home, you know, to do things the way I did, but sometimes giving your husband a scare might actually work. Because I was gone for about a month and a half. It was a long time, but it was enough for me to get myself back on track, to readjust my routine. And then from that point on, the things I wanted to do, like hiring someone to help me at home so I wouldn't have to do housework, were accepted. He was okay with it. At least twice a week, we'll have someone to clean, to iron the clothes, to wash, to keep things organized. That already freed me from one responsibility. I didn't start working more. I started studying. So for him, it was great because I started doing an online degree. We even moved apartments because we used to live in the same place since he was in college, because he went to college, he graduated and everything. We stayed in the same apartment, in that same neighborhood, in that same place. So we moved to a different apartment. We moved to a 3-bedroom apartment. Our daughters kept sharing the same room, but then I had a place to study, to work, and it felt like we had a fresh start. I told him now I was doing an online degree. After this degree, I could have my own profession, feel validated. I started telling him that we should go for walks, so we also started going to the park, exercising there, running. That started to be really good for our marriage, for our relationship, so I think I never had another man in my life. But there are many people who have sad, traumatic stories, a marriage that doesn't work, that doesn't go well. There are good men. And even though I questioned God a lot about why he took my grandmother and my mother from me, today I see that he gave me a husband and a family, my daughters. They are the lights of my life. So a lot of what my mother didn't give me in my childhood, today I try to give to my daughters. In fact, one of the things that happened when I was there numb was that my friend came yelling at me, telling me to hook up with another guy. I remembered my mother because one of the last people who yelled at me, telling me I was stupid, was my mother. Before she died, when she was in that same numb state because my grandmother had died. So that moment there of me remembering that my mother was high and that I was being left behind, maybe it was a trigger for when I realized that I was repeating my mother's cycle of numbness, leaving my daughters, right? So all of this was very important for my learning. So it's something I'm not proud of, but it's something that taught me a lot. Hi, Meketes, how are you all doing? Today I am sharing this story about motherhood. Many times we need to go through some failures to find the glorious things in life, right? Unfortunately, sometimes, you know that saying, right? We go all the way to rock bottom because at the bottom, there's no way to go any lower. Now it's time to look up and try to get out of it. So this is the story of a woman who came out of a life that seemed destined to go wrong. The girl was going to a shelter. She was going to live an extremely turbulent life. And she managed to have a thriving marriage, That worked out with a good man, a man who is well off. And even so, she still hit rock bottom because this says a lot about who we are at our core. Sometimes we're in an ideal, perfect moment in life with a good job, a good relationship, a nice house, good kids. But internally, inside our minds, we're not feeling well and even less deserving. We feel like we don't deserve it, like we feel we need something different. And that's when you end up changing direction, going down such an unhappy and sad path. In the end, really, guys, you need to have a good job, right? You have to be more grateful for what you have. So this is a story that really talks about hitting rock bottom, right? About getting out of it. And I truly hope from the bottom of my heart that anyone who is caught up in drugs, anyone who is numbing themselves, that you ask for help, that you can recognize that this path won't take you anywhere other than dependency, psychosis, suffering, and things that will hurt you and harm you so that you can get out of this life. And if you need help too, send me your story. If you feel like you're going down this path, send me your story so I can share it here on the channel. And we always try to support each other here like a support community so we can get out of this reality, out of this life. If you like the video, also send me your story on Stories Channel Jotipalo Badme. Like this video, comment, and leave a word of encouragement for this mother, for this woman, okay? Share it with someone who needs to watch this video. Kisses, and see you in the next video.